Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Nathan Sweeney and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect at Ingram Micro Cloud. Today we'll be talking about migrating workloads to Azure and what is involved, as well as the tools required to complete a successful migration. As we know, there are normally 4 key events that drive digital transformation of a business, of which are outlined on the slide. So let's just take a second and go through those. So first of all, you've got modernization, which is improving the end user, the end customer, should I say, and employee experiences by providing newer technologies and improving efficiency. Next would be transformation, evolving how your business and end customer businesses operate and interact with their intended markets. Then you've got the growth of a business, which is giving a business the ability to scale based on demand to organically meet their ever-growing business needs. Then you've got things like business returns, which is improving internal and external business operational efficiency, allowing a business to rapidly produce tangible business returns, such as a return on investment on moving away from a data center infrastructure up into the cloud. Finally, there's one that's not on the list but should be at the forefront of all of our minds, and that's global challenges such as things like pandemics. Over the last year, we're all aware that IT has massively changed, and rather than being a shared service of a business, it's now at the core of many businesses and their requirements. Early on, the businesses that did pivot very quickly at the start of the pandemic have seen large returns against competitors on that particular investment in IT, and have been able to keep ahead of changes in behavior of consumers even. Now, we've spoken about the internal business drivers of a business to want to change. However, there's also common specific triggers that lead a company to migrate away from their existing infrastructure and migrate up to the cloud. Some examples would be situations like data centers, their leases expiring, or acquisition. They normally signal, time-bound deadlines. Rather than having to then sign up for a further 3 years and make a long-term and expensive cash commitment or investment. These scenarios are a perfect time to look at what extensibility and flexibility Azure can do for them as a business. You've got things like app innovation as well, which might need downtime, so therefore you may as well strategically go, right, okay, if this needs downtime, what could we do? It could be the capacity of the data center, and then why increase that capacity when you can leverage what the cloud can do for you. And that way, if the capacity only needs to be temporary, for example, and you can just spin it up and drop it whenever you need it, it gives you that flexibility and extensibility throughout being able to extend your business and utilize technology as and when it's required. You can also use cloud. A lot of people use CDN, for example. That's a cloud-based technology. So you can leverage things like that to make improve application performance across geographies, for example. Security is another one, especially at the moment with threats and compliance. So Azure can help you address these using things like Security Center and Cent, especially as things become more increasingly more complex. There's rising costs of them, and then also the talent gap of those evolving threats is also becoming larger as well because they're getting more complicated. Then you've also got things like software and hardware refreshes, or end of life or end of service, even pieces of support and so on, when contracts come up. So taking advantage of those existing hardware and software investments can also be kind of a strong driver to stay on-prem, but you also limit yourself in regard to the amount of tech that you can use unless you start to extend into the cloud and then figure that out as and when that comes about. Partners can simplify cloud migration journeys for these customers utilizing Azure Migrate. It provides a centralized hub to assess and migrate on-premises servers, infrastructure, applications, and data, such as SQL database servers and MySQL, and gives you an indication of what that would look like when it's in Azure. The numbers on this slide were taken of January last year and may have changed since then. So, for example, I think there's about 15 migration tools now because VDI is added in there for Windows Virtual Desktop. I think, please don't quote me on it, but I think it's up to 50,000 servers can be assessed during a single project. And then all, I think we're now up to 60 global regions. The latest will be available on the site. But yeah, there's a lot that can happen, and we can move your infrastructure from wherever you are to wherever you need to be or your customers are. So let's just touch on Azure Migrate a little bit further, and then just discuss what it can actually do for you. As I've already mentioned, it's a central hub for any kind of migration, really. And the three core components of that are the fact that it can handle multiple scenarios, it gives diverse capabilities, and it gives one central pane of glass to look at where you are with all of your migration projects. So for example, let's look at multiple scenarios. You can migrate Windows and Linux servers, databases, data, web applications, and virtual desktops in one location. Now, you may have to run multiple projects for each of them because they may the end customer that you're talking to may want to run it that particular way. So, for example, the immediate requirement of moving the VDI up into the cloud, and then also whatever applications are also required at the same time. And then further down the line, it may be a different department and so on. The diverse capabilities are the fact that you can run comprehensive discovery, assessment, and migration capabilities. They're powered by Azure itself and also third-party integrated tools. Again, you've got that centralized platform, so a centralized visibility of those, that end-to-end tracking of where that project is, which gives you the tracking and the insights needed to be able to run successful projects. So just touching on Azure Migrate, again, just going through some of the scenarios that can be ran through Azure Migrate. You've got Windows servers and Linux servers. It doesn't really matter which server it is anymore. You've also got SQL and non-SQL database migration, so you've got SQL and MySQL, which can be moved directly into the cloud. You can also do Oracle moves as well. One of the really interesting ones that I personally like is the third one down around web assessment and migration tools. There's a tool that you can literally point at your website and it will tell you, it will assess your website for you, and it will give you a good indication of what you need to set up in order to run effectively in Azure. It will also do the migration for you if you've got access to the underlying IIS server, or Apache server, doesn't really matter. So yeah, it's a really simple service, and then combine that with something like database migration assistant makes it a very quick and easy process to move front-end web applications and modernize them very quickly. Obviously, at the moment, Windows Virtual Desktop, so you can assess existing VDI platforms using the tools that are currently there. In Azure Migrate, again, it's that centralized platform. You've got data migration using Databox. You can also run assessments across things, multiple platforms at the same time. So you've got VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers. Even if you're looking to migrate away from another public cloud provider, you can treat those as physical machines and also assess them to see what the differences would be if you were to migrate those across to Azure as well. The next part of Azure Migrate is those advanced capabilities of what it can actually do. So what you can do is you can download some ISO images, which you can then set up your existing infrastructure and then run assessments based on that, whether that's agent-based or agentless-based. What you can also do is upload CSV files, providing they're in the right format, and what Azure will then do, the assessment service will look at that and it will give you some right sizing recommendations. So, for example, readiness assessments, cost estimation, performance-based right sizing, and also if you want the agent one, it will start to do app dependency modeling for you. You can start building out how your applications are currently dependent on one another, which is extremely useful because I have seen it where companies have migrated applications thinking there's no third additional dependencies. However, there always are, so it's worthwhile doing that. And also because you're using the tools that are native to Azure, normally those tools are free depending on which ones you're using. And also because you can run them in parallel to existing, say for example a database, you can sync the database with an existing one in Azure and then almost have an immediate cutover as and when required. The next part of Migrate is around the extensibility and using different tools to achieve the results that you want to achieve. So let's say, for example, you want to assess some VDI infrastructure. There's an ISV tool called Lakeside, which you can download and run against that infrastructure and get an assessment. One of the things that I would say is when you're running an assessment, the best thing to do is to run it for one business period of time. Now, all businesses operate differently. So, for example, one business may run a 30-day, and then at the end of the month they run, or they may run end of the quarter, or end of the 6th month, or end of the year, and that's normally financially driven. So the accountancy team will be saying, no, we need to reconcile everything by the end of the year. And at that point, that's what you need to capture, because that will give you the top end of what you need to actually run that infrastructure. Now, for example, you may have invested in some physical infrastructure which only ever gets used 10% of the time, but the reason why you've invested it is for that one time of the year. Now, if you flip that around and say, well, actually, you only need to pay for 10% of the utilization of that throughout the entire year until you need it, it's a better return on investment model than just paying for something which you don't use all the time. Now, there's arguments for and against that. However, in my mind, the return on investment makes more sense to only use what you need as and when you need it. The purpose of this slide is just to show you the fact that there are tools which do different roles. So the Azure Migrate tools, in my opinion, are some of the best tools, and there are other tools which perhaps give you different levels of reporting, assessments and things like that. So have a look at them, have a look at what they can do and what you want to get from them as well, because it's really important that you understand the differences between what they can do for you. If you need anything or any advice on those, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll do what I can to help. So finally, the last part of it was around centralized visibility of your projects that are currently going on. The reason for this is to give you end-to-end visibility of where everything is within your migration projects. So, for example, if you've got, I don't know, 100 servers that you're looking to migrate into the cloud, you may want to run a project on 10 of them because they may only be front-end facing. So therefore, you may want to leverage a different piece of technology to be able to assess that piece of infrastructure. And in addition to running a standard assessment on the virtual machine that web app, for example, resides on. So you may have an IS front end that's running an 8 gig, 16 gig 8-core processor when it doesn't absolutely need to at all. The outcome of that may say that you need to move to a B2MS, for example, which is about 50 quid a month. So you don't need to pay for that amount of resources when you don't need it. Alternatively, the better option would actually be to move across to a web app service, because that allows you to implement it into a CI/CD pipeline and have better facilities moving forward when it comes to development and implementation as well as scalability. So lots of things to consider when you're thinking about moving across from one platform to another. So having that visibility platform allows that process to be a lot easier, and especially in management overhead, you can easily between the people that you're running. So for this is where we are, and for the customer, this is where we are. The migration phases, when it comes to actually migrating a piece of infrastructure is split into three core components. That's discovering, assessing, and then migrating that piece of infrastructure. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see the fact that you've got servers, databases, and applications, which normally are the three core components of pretty much any infrastructure. For example, using a server, let's follow that process. You would deploy an Azure Migration appliance to the on-premises piece of infrastructure. You would then start the discovery phase to be able to analyze the server's performance. Once you've then got that, you move over to stage 2, where you start assessing those servers for right-sizing capabilities. Not right-sizing capabilities, but right-sizing of that server. So when you move it into the cloud, if you were going to do a lift and shift, you would have an understanding of the costs that would be associated with that. And the reason why we do these discovery and assessment parts of this process is to understand what the implications from a financial perspective and commercial one are going to be for the end customer. It's normally top of the list, so we may as well be upfront and honest and open about where that currently stands, right? And what we can do as part of that assessment is group servers together. So I've implied it a few times throughout this today, and that is saying, okay, well, I want to move these front-end servers. What's that going to look like? I want to move this middleware. What does that look like? And the back-end side of things as well. Now, the third phase is using the same migration appliance that you've already implemented on-prem to actually do that migration for you. So what that means is it uses what's known as Azure Site Recovery to actually move across those servers, and it keeps them in sync so that when you do decide to make any DNS changes or however you're going to make that particular change, you can set up everything in advance of that and have it running in the background, ready to flick over as and when required. Now, a lot of people get quite nervous around databases because they normally contain quite a lot of information which is relevant to the company. So, using the Data Migration Assistant, of which has been in use for many years to move around databases, you can then run your discovery and assessment, and then you can also migrate using the same application. So you don't need to use a different application to do that particular migration. When it comes to databases, if you've got lots of stored procedures and things like that, you may want to make an assessment on what you want to move to. You can set up serverless, managed, or just normal virtual machines with SQL installed. So you can migrate to either or when it comes to utilizing that particular tool. And then, as I've already previously mentioned, the application migration tool, which analyzes your server, your websites that are residing on your server. It then assesses them, it finds them, assesses them, and tells you if they're going to be compatible moving forward. And then if you want to, you just click a button and it will migrate them for you. It's actually really, really simple to use. So I highly recommend, if you have a dev environment on-prem at the moment and you want to test all of this, sign up for the free 12 months. And 150 quid a credit. If you've got Visual Studio and you're a gold or silver accredited Microsoft partner, sign yourself up for a Visual Studio subscription where you get about 120 quid a month, I think it is, on Azure, and try these services because they genuinely do work. So let me know how you get on with that. Just before we end today, I want to give you a list of resources of which you can go and use today. So once you've signed up for those test environments, highly recommend just having a look at the documentation. It's a lot better than it used to be many years ago. So Microsoft documentation is actually extremely good now, and it's actually very collaborative as well. So if you put a suggestion in there, if you find something missing, it will get reviewed and then it will be updated. But it is worth checking it out, and it's kept to date. Also, if you want to, you can go to the Microsoft Learn page. It goes through a lot of migration steps. It will show you what it looks like. It will show you how to do them, things to take into consideration as well. One last little bit as well. There's also something called Quick Start in Azure as well. It's highly worthwhile. I recommend you have a look at that and a look at the processes that are defined in there. They fall very closely to the cloud adoption framework and what it looks like. So go and have a look and let me know how you get along. that's the end of today's session. It's been short and sweet. So if you do have any questions, my name is Nathan Sweeney, Cloud Solution Architect here at Ingram Micro. So feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions you've got. I'll be hanging around for a few minutes anyway. But yeah, honestly, go and test it. One key takeaway that I want you to take away from today is the fact that migrating is actually not fraught with danger as it used to be. Obviously, it does require planning, as any migration would, but the tools that are there are actually extremely robust and have been used multiple times in many different scenarios to perform very large migrations as well as very small migrations. So it's all about scalability. If you're going to migrate, one last thing, if you're going to migrate 3 or 4 servers, the same process applies if you're going to migrate 300 servers. It's just slightly more complex and longer. So just bear that in mind when it comes to scalability. Again, Nathan Sweeney, if you need anything, feel free to reach out and I'll be hanging around for a few minutes. Thank you very much. Hello everybody, and thank you very much for attending today. Just to go through a couple of questions that have come in. First one first, apologies for the sound quality. I'm hoping that you can hear me a little bit better, and there goes my phone. Now, so apologies about that. We'll see what we can do to fix that before it's available as a live stream afterwards. As a recorded stream afterwards. One of the questions that came in was around moving SQL databases. Now, I know I kind of inferred it a little earlier. However, moving SQL databases is actually relatively straightforward, and the Database Migration Assistant tool has been around for quite some time. So, excuse me, I'd recommend if you've got a SQL database, even if I wouldn't use a production one, but if you've got like a test database or anything like that, then run the Database Migration Assistant against that and see what it actually gives you. If you've got a VSS account, a Visual Studio account, then you can also, from the Database Migration Assistant, is access your Azure account from that, and then also create an attached database in order to be able to sync direct or migrate directly from the Database Migration Assistant tool. So rather than going into Azure setting up a database, you can actually do it all from the single tool. So you can have it work for you immediately, and it's a really easy tool to use. Everybody seems to get scared when it comes to SQL databases, but it is fairly straightforward to use. In regards to things like stored procedures, they all need to be addressed on their own merit. So without understanding what the database is doing and things like that, then I would recommend reaching to DBA, internal DBA, just to say, right, okay, we're going to move this. What's it going to look like when it moves in? We're going to run those stored procedures, and what do they actually do, and what is that going to do for us as a business? So, for example, on the weekend, some businesses like to pull and index and do a load of funky things with their databases. So having a look at what those stored procedures are doing and to see if there is a different way of doing it maybe, or if some instances for SQL database on a server as opposed to a PaaS service, for example, may be a particular option. Again, that does fall down to risk versus reward when it comes to the actual database and the running of the database and operational instances of the database, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, yeah, send me a message. The other question that's come in is around Azure Site Recovery. Yes, from a cost perspective, it's about £18.60, I think, if I remember correctly, give or take. So it's about 20 quid a server to have as Azure as the secondary data center. So, for example, what normally happens is, and I think I referred to this earlier, was you'd normally have a production and a non-production environment, or a DR environment that's a stripped-down version of that production environment. Let's say, for example, just from a cost perspective, the production costs £5 grand a month, and the other one costs £5 grand a month because it's a full-blown DR platform, and it's only running 3 servers. I don't know, front-end, middleware, back-end database. what you can do is have 3 servers replicating into Azure, and it will only cost you 60 quid. And that is bar the storage, of course. So you do need to pay for whatever storage you put up there. If it's a SQL database and you're replicating into a PaaS service, you are going to be charged for that. So it will be more than 60 quid. But if it was just a virtual machine, ignoring the database element, then it would be 20 quid a virtual machine. So theoretically, for a few hundred quid, you actually put in a full-blown DR platform of which you can click over to. You may want to put something like front door in front of that, just so you've got some kind of geo load balancing of some kind, or traffic manager, depending on what you're balancing across those 2 sites. Then obviously one's going to, the other one will be the second. What else do we have? Just bear with me 1 second. I'll just have a look. So the Azure native tools, the tools are available for free of charge, which are the Microsoft tools. They are completely free to use. It's only when you start using storage and compute that it will actually cost you. But effectively, these tools were initially designed not as migration tools. They were initially designed as what were they? As disaster recovery tools. However, they ended up becoming migration tools. That's the way I should have put that. So yeah, they've been used for single server migrations, and they've been used for hundreds of servers migrations. So it is truly a centralized platform for migrating small projects right the way through to hundreds, if not thousands, of servers at any one time. If you're migrating that amount of servers, you're going to probably need some assistance. So, yeah, give us a shout. Yes, the webinar will be available to watch afterwards as well, and I think you can download them now as well. So the link will, I think, once this is finished and it processes it in the background, they'll send you an email to say it's available, and then you can go and download it and watch it again or whatever it may be. But yes, it will be available. Are there the only questions that have come in so far? So I'm just going to go on mute for a minute or so, and but yeah, any questions, drop them in the chat and I'll have a look. But there's nothing else coming at the moment. But yeah, have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar. Right, okay, so no further questions have come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up the webinar for today. Again, if you do need anything, please feel free to reach out, and we'll do whatever we can to help win those deals or bring them over the line or assess or whatever it may be. So again, it's Nathan Sweeney at Ingram Micro. So feel free to reach. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.